They tell us we are resilient. They tell us that the Canadian banking system is the envy of the world, a fortress of stability in a sea of global volatility. But there's the shadow fact that no one in Ottawa or on Bay Street wants to whisper too loudly. Canadians are the most indebted people in the G7. We aren't just carrying a balance, we are drowning in a sea of cheap money that has suddenly turned very, very expensive. Imagine walking through your neighborhood in the GTA or the suburbs of Vancouver. On the surface, it looks like prosperity, parked Teslas, manicured lawns, and high-end strollers. But behind those front doors, there is a visceral, gut-wrenching panic. The shadow fact is that nearly 50% of Canadians are $200 away from insolvency at the end of every month. This isn't a statistic, it's a heartbeat of anxiety that pulses through the Tim Hortons drive-thru and the 401 commute. We are living on the edge of a precipice, fueled by a housing bubble that has become too big to fail, but too heavy to fly. The curiosity isn't if the recession is coming, it's how long the government can keep the illusion spinning before the floor drops out. But what happens when the floor isn't just wood, but a trapdoor into a new reality?
The first sign of the Great Canadian Reset won't be a stock market crash on the TSX. It will be the sound of a mailbox opening. Across the country, hundreds of thousands of homeowners are staring at mortgage renewal notices with numbers that don't make sense. If you bought in 2020 at a 1.9% fixed rate, you're now looking at 6% or higher. For many, that's not just a tight month. It's an extra $1,500 or $2,000 every single month just to get a roof over their heads. This is the mortgage cliff, and it is the emotional trigger point for the disappearance of the middle class. People who did everything right, went to university, got the professional job, saved their loonies, are realizing that the math of the Canadian dream no longer works. The BoC interest rate hikes weren't just a tool to fight inflation. They were a surgical strike against the disposable income of every family from Halifax to Victoria. We are entering a period where the working poor now includes people making six figures. When your mortgage takes 60% of your take-home pay, you aren't a homeowner, you are a glorified tenant of the bank. And the worst part, this is only the beginning of the renewal cycle. The open loop is starting to widen. What happens when the bank says no to the renewal? Walk into a Loblaws or a Sobeys today and you'll see it. The sticker shock that has become a national trauma. We used to complain about the price of gas, but now it's the price of a block of cheese or a pack of chicken breasts that sends our blood pressure skyrocketing. The grocery store has become a battlefield of the recession. While the corporate giants report record profits, the average Canadian is playing a mental game of Tetris with their grocery cart, putting back the luxuries just to afford the staples. This is where the emotional pain of the recession becomes visceral. It's the feeling of being gaslit by the system, told that inflation is cooling while your grocery bill has doubled in 3 years. The middle class is being hollowed out at the checkout counter. We are seeing the rise of the no-name lifestyle, not by choice, but by survival. The curiosity gap here is haunting. At what point does the cost of living become the cost of existing? When we see bread prices fixed and profit margins padded, the trust in the Canadian social contract begins to crumble. We are working 40, 50, 60 hours a week just to eat food that feels like it's priced for royalty. It's a quiet, simmering rage that defines the early stages of this downturn. In a true Canadian recession, the ghost condos of the GTA will become our modern ruins. For a decade, we were told that real estate was the only safe bet, the Canadian gold. But as the recession deepens, the investment units, the Airbnbs, and the shoebox condos in City Place will sit empty. Investors who gambled on infinite growth are finding themselves cash flow negative to the tune of thousands a month. The curiosity gap is terrifying. What happens to the economy when the single largest driver of our GDP, housing, turns into a liability? We are already seeing the for sale signs linger longer, the price reduced tags appearing like scars on the MLS. This isn't just a housing correction, it's a structural failure. The emotional pain is felt by the young generation, the Gen Z and millennials who were told to just wait for the crash. Well, the crash is here, but the credit is gone. The dream of owning a piece of the country you were born in is being replaced by the reality of lifelong renting in a basement suite. The disappearing middle class is being replaced by a permanent renter class, and the psychological impact of losing that anchor of ownership is profound. It changes the way you view your future, your country, and your worth.
The job market in Canada is currently a house of cards. We see the low unemployment headlines, but look closer at the shadow fact. We are losing full-time, high-paying private sector jobs and replacing them with part-time, low-wage service work or public sector bloat. In a real recession, the tech layoffs we've seen in Toronto and Waterloo are just the appetizer. The main course is the white-collar professional who thought they were recession-proof. When the consumer stops spending because their mortgage is too high and their food is too expensive, the B2B economy collapses next. Marketing firms, HR consultants, mid-level managers, the laptop class will find themselves staring at a LinkedIn page that has gone silent. The visceral pain of the 40-hour workweek is that it no longer guarantees a 40-year career. The curiosity gap lies in the side hustle culture. Everyone has a second or third job now, not for extra money, but to cover the CRA tax bite and the rising cost of utilities. We are a nation of tired people. The recession will look like a quiet office, a meeting invited that turns into a severance package, and the realization that the safety net we pay so much in taxes for is stretched thinner than ever before.
Let's talk about the tax bite. In Canada, we pride ourselves on our social services, but as the recession hits, the CRA becomes an even more formidable shadow in our lives. As your income stagnates and the cost of everything rises, the bracket creep ensures the government takes its cut before you even see a cent. In a downturn, the government's debt, now over $1 trillion, needs servicing. Who pays for that? You do. The emotional pain of seeing 30 to 45% of your paycheck vanish before it hits your account, only to wait 12 hours in an ER or months for a specialist, is the definition of the disappearing middle class. We are paying premium prices for basic services. The curiosity gap is, how long can the Canadian taxpayers sustain a system that seems to be failing them at every turn? In a recession, the tax burden doesn't go down. It often goes up as the government tries to spend its way out of the hole. This creates a death spiral for small businesses and individuals alike. You work harder, the government takes more, and the services you rely on get worse. It's a feeling of being trapped in a machine that is designed to keep you exactly where you are, or push you one step back. The healthcare collapse is the visceral reality of a Canadian recession that no one wants to admit. When the economy tanks, the tax base shrinks, and the already crumbling provincial healthcare systems reach a breaking point. A recession doesn't just mean fewer jobs. It means more stress, more mental health crises, and more physical ailments brought on by the grind of survival. Imagine being in a recession, losing your job, and then realizing that the free healthcare you've touted your whole life involves a 3-day wait in a hallway. This is the true cost of our economic instability. The disappearing middle class can no longer afford to opt out via private clinics or travel to the US for care. They are stuck in a queue that never ends. The curiosity gap here is the MAID conversation, the dark reality that Canada is increasingly seen as a place where it is easier to end a life than to support one through a financial and medical crisis. This is a heavy, painful truth that hits at the heart of the Canadian identity. We used to be the kindest country. Now we are a country where the kindness is being rationed by a spreadsheet in a government office.
What about your TFSA and RRSP? In a recession, these aren't just retirement accounts. They become survival funds. The curiosity gap is the liquidation trap. As the recession bites, Canadians will be forced to pull money out of their RRSPs just to pay the mortgage or fix the car. But the CRA is waiting. You'll be taxed on that withdrawal as income, losing the tax-deferred growth you worked years to build. This is how the wealth gap in Canada becomes a canyon. While the ultra-wealthy can ride out the storm, the middle class is forced to eat their seed corn. The visceral pain of watching your retirement dreams evaporate in a single year of high interest rates and job loss is something that stays with a generation. We are seeing a K-shaped recession. Those with assets and no debt get richer as they buy up the distressed properties and stocks of the middle class, while those who were saving for a rainy day realize it's not just raining, it's a hurricane. Your TFSA, meant for your future, is being emptied for a today that is too expensive to manage. This is the quiet destruction of Canadian multi-generational wealth.
Main Street Canada is going to look very different. Walk through any historic downtown in Ontario or the Maritimes, and you'll see the for-lease signs appearing like tombstones. Small businesses, the cafes, the boutiques, the local contractors, are the first to go in a recession. They don't have the corporate cushion of a Walmart or an Amazon. The emotional pain here is the loss of community. When the local hardware store closes because the owner couldn't renew the commercial lease at 8%, a piece of the Canadian identity dies with it. The curiosity gap is, what replaces them? Usually it's nothing, or it's a global conglomerate that doesn't care about the local hockey team or the food bank. The disappearing middle class isn't just about individuals, it's about the middle class of businesses. We are becoming an economy of Goliaths, where the Davids are being crushed by the weight of debt and declining consumer spending. If you think the recession is just numbers on a screen, wait until you see your favorite local spot boarded up with a property seized notice from the landlord. That's when it becomes real.
The Bank of Canada is in an impossible position, and their Sophie's choice will define the recession. If they cut rates to save the housing market and the middle class, the Canadian dollar, the loonie, could plummet against the US greenback. This would make everything we import, which is almost everything, drastically more expensive, fueling a second wave of inflation. If they keep rates high to save the dollar, they break the back of every homeowner with a variable rate or a looming renewal. The curiosity gap is the currency crisis. What happens when a trip across the border or buying a new car becomes 30% more expensive because our dollar is worth 65 cents US? The visceral pain is the feeling of our national purchasing power evaporating. We are a resource-rich nation that somehow can't afford its own resources. The BoC's dilemma is the open loop that keeps investors awake at night. There is no soft landing when you're flying a plane made of debt. The landing will be hard, and the debris will be the savings accounts of millions of Canadians who trusted the experts when they said rates would stay low for a long time. The rental trap is the new Canadian reality. In a recession, as people lose their homes or are forced to sell, the demand for rentals skyrockets. But with high interest rates, developers stop building. This creates a supply chokehold that pushes rents to astronomical levels. Imagine a recession where you lose your job, but your rent goes up by 10%. This is the visceral nightmare facing young Canadians. The rental trap means you can never save enough for a down payment because your rent consumes the very money you'd use to escape. The middle class is being squeezed into smaller and smaller spaces, the roommate economy for 35-year-old professionals. The curiosity gap is the social unrest that follows. When people feel they have no stake in the system, no home to own, no future to build, the social contract tears. We are seeing the rise of rent strikes and a general sense of hopelessness that is un-Canadian. We were the country of peace, order, and good government, but the order is hard to maintain when people can't afford a one-bedroom apartment on a full-time salary. This is the invisible recession, the one that happens in the shadows of the rental market. The working poor professional is a new demographic in Canada. These are the people with the degrees, the titles, and the good jobs. But in this recession, their salary is a relic of 2019, while their expenses are from 2024. The emotional pain is the status collapse. It's the shame of having to go to a food bank while wearing the suit, or the quiet desperation of choosing between a dental appointment and a car repair. The disappearing middle class is defined by this polite poverty. Canadians don't like to talk about money, so we suffer in silence. We keep up appearances while our credit card balances grow like a cancer. The curiosity gap is, how long can this pretend and extend lifestyle last? The recession will force the great unmasking. People will have to admit they can't afford the lifestyle they've been sold. The Canadian dream has become a Canadian debt, and the weight of that debt is crushing the mental health of our most productive citizens. We are a nation of high-functioning people who are one bad week away from a total breakdown. This is the psychological toll of an economy that has outpaced its people. The psychological impact of this recession cannot be overstated. Canada has long been a high-trust society. We trust our neighbors, our banks, and our government. But when the economy fails so fundamentally, that trust evaporates. The visceral pain is the loss of agency. You do everything you're supposed to, and you still fail. This leads to a profound sense of betrayal.
The curiosity gap is, what does Canada look like as a low-trust society? We see it in the rise of polarized politics, the trucker protests, and the general cynicism on social media. The recession acts as an accelerant for this social decay. When people are fighting for crumbs, they start looking for someone to blame. Whether it's the banks, the government, or the immigrants, the finger-pointing begins when the pockets are empty. The middle class, which usually acts as the social glue of the country, is too busy trying to survive to keep the peace. This is the dark side of the recession, the part that isn't measured in GDP, but in the bitterness of the national conversation. We are losing our sense of we and replacing it with a desperate me. Survival in the Canadian recession has birthed the secondary market economy. Have you noticed how Facebook Marketplace and Kijiji are flooded? This isn't just people decluttering. This is the middle class selling their possessions to pay the Enbridge bill or the property tax. The visceral pain is selling your childhood hockey gear or the family's second car just to stay afloat for another month. The curiosity gap is the shadow economy. More Canadians are working under the table or engaging in barter and trade to avoid the CRA and the high cost of formal services. We are becoming a hustle nation. The recession is forcing us to become entrepreneurs of our own survival. But this comes at a cost, the time poverty. When you work your 9 to 5, then spend your evenings delivering Skip the Dishes and your weekends selling furniture on Kijiji, when do you live? The disappearing middle class is being traded for a gig class that has no benefits, no security, and no future. This is the quiet erosion of our quality of life. We are busier than ever, yet we have less than ever. The math is broken, and the recession is the moment we all have to show our work.
The immigration paradox is a central theme of this downturn. Canada has built its economic model on high levels of immigration to drive growth, but in a recession, this model hits a wall. The curiosity gap is, what happens when the new Canadians realize the dream they were sold is a nightmare? We see skilled doctors and engineers driving Ubers because their credentials aren't recognized, while they pay $2,500 for a basement in Brampton. The visceral pain is the stolen future for both the newcomers and the Canadian-born youth who are competing for the same entry-level jobs and scarce housing. This isn't about xenophobia, it's about absorptive capacity. When the economy shrinks but the population grows, the per capita GDP craters. We are collectively getting poorer, even if the total number looks okay to the economists. The disappearing middle class is being crowded out. The recession will force a difficult conversation about our growth model, a conversation that is fraught with tension, but impossible to ignore. Can we remain a welcoming nation when we can't even house the people who are already here? This is the open loop that could redefine our national identity.
Wealth transfer or wealth destruction? In every recession, money doesn't disappear, it just changes hands. The curiosity gap in Canada is the great intergenerational theft. The boomer generation holds the vast majority of the real estate wealth, while the younger generations hold the debt. As the recession hits, we will see a wealth destruction for those who bought at the peak. But for those with cash, this is a vulture opportunity. The visceral pain is watching institutional investors and REITs buy up distressed family homes, turning the Canadian suburbs into permanent rental colonies. The middle class is being harvested. If you don't have the bank of mom and dad to bail you out of a 6% mortgage renewal, you lose your equity, and a corporation buys your house for 70 cents on the dollar. This is the feudalization of Canada. We are moving from a nation of owners to a nation of serfs who pay rent to lords who live in Dubai or New York. The recession is the catalyst for this final transfer of wealth. Unless you are prepared, you are the product being sold. How do you protect yourself when the game is rigged?
To understand the future, we have to look at the 1990s. Canada went through a brutal debt crisis then, leading to massive cuts in social spending and a lost decade for many. But the curiosity gap is, we are in a much worse position now. In the 90s, our debt-to-income ratio was around 90%. Today, it is over 180%. We have double the debt and half the resilience. The visceral pain of the 90s was the brain drain, our best and brightest moving to the US for better pay and lower costs. We are seeing the brain drain 2.0 now. Why stay in Toronto making $100K and living in a shoebox when you can go at Texas or Florida, make $150K USD and buy a mansion?
The recession will accelerate this exit. The disappearing middle class isn't just falling into poverty, they're leaving the country. This leaves Canada with a shrinking tax base and an aging population, a demographic time bomb. The recession isn't just a temporary dip, it's a warning shot that our current economic model is unsustainable. We are at a crossroads: innovate and reform, or become a museum of a middle class that used to exist. The carbon tax and energy prices add a unique Canadian layer to this recession. In a country this large and this cold, energy isn't a luxury, it's a survival requirement. The visceral pain of a $400 heating bill in a January cold snap, while the government adds a carbon levy on top, is a breaking point for many. The curiosity gap is the rural-urban divide. While urbanites with public transit might manage, the rural middle class is being decimated. Their commute is longer, their homes are harder to heat, and their food is more expensive to transport. The recession will hit the hinterlands of Canada with a brutality that the cottage country elite won't understand. We are seeing a geography of despair. When the cost of going to work exceeds the take-home pay because of gas and carbon taxes, people simply stop going. This leads to economic paralysis. The recession isn't just about demand, it's about the cost of participation in the economy becoming too high for the average Canadian. This is the quiet exit from the workforce that the statistics don't fully capture. The brain drain to the US is the shadow fact of our labor market. In a recession, the US often recovers faster and offers more upside. For a Canadian engineer, nurse, or tech worker, the exit door is always open. The visceral pain is the empty nest, parents realizing their children can't afford to live within 1,000 miles of them. The curiosity gap is what happens to a country that exports its talent and imports its labor. We are becoming a training ground for the American economy. We pay for the healthcare and education of our youth, only for them to give their most productive years to another country because they can't afford a home in Hamilton or Calgary. This human capital flight is the ultimate sign of a failing middle class. The recession will make the American dream look a lot more attractive than the Canadian survival. If we don't fix the cost of living, we won't have anyone left to run the country. This is the brain drain that will haunt our GDP for decades to come. The open loop. Who stays to pay the bills? Social unrest in Canada is a sleeping giant. We think of ourselves as too polite for riots, but the no-buy movements and the Loblaws boycotts are just the beginning. The visceral pain of inequality is a powerful fuel. When people see the wealthy insulated from the recession, continuing to vacation in Muskoka or Maui, while the middle class skips meals, the politeness ends. The curiosity gap is, what is the breaking point? History shows that when food and shelter become unaffordable, the order in peace, order, and good government disappears. We are seeing the radicalization of the middle class. These aren't anarchists, they are accountants and teachers who feel the system has cheated them. The recession will test the social fabric of Canada like never before. We are a country held together by a shared promise of a better life. If that promise is broken, what holds us together? The recession isn't just an economic event, it's a sociological test. And right now, we are failing. The shadow fact is that the anger is growing, and it's looking for a target. How do you protect your family in this new Canada? The first step is financial literacy as a survival skill. The curiosity gap is the off-grid economy. People are moving to cash, gold, Bitcoin, or hard assets to escape the digital seizure and inflationary erosion of the loonie. The visceral pain is the simplification of life. It means saying no to the new car, the all-inclusive vacation, and the subscription lifestyle. It's about deleveraging, paying off the high-interest debt at all costs. The middle class that survives this recession will be the one that downsized early. It's about building resilience hubs, connecting with neighbors, growing your own food, and becoming less dependent on the just-in-time global supply chain. The recession is a filter. It will filter out those who lived on credit and reward those who lived on reality. This is the hard truth of the Canadian downturn. It's time to stop listening to the optimism of the banks and start listening to the cynicism of your bank account. Preparation is the only antidote to the panic that is coming. The new Canada that emerges from this recession will not be the one we remember from the early 2000s. It will be a leaner, more sober nation. The shadow fact of our recovery is that there is no going back. The housing bubble has changed the DNA of our cities, and the debt has changed the DNA of our families. The disappearing middle class will either be a tragedy or a transformation. The curiosity gap is, will we use this crisis to finally address the productivity gap, the housing monopoly, and the tax burden? Or will we just wait for the next bubble to blow? The emotional pain of this period is a refiner's fire. It's hurting us, yes, but it's also showing us what truly matters. It's not the home equity or the status symbols. It's the community, the resilience, and the grit of the Canadian people. As we close this chapter, the open loop remains. Will you be a victim of the reset or an architect of your own survival? The recession is here. The Great Canadian Reset has begun, and the only way out is through. Welcome to the new reality. Watch.